I won the single biggest award of my entire career, and the 4 front row seats I'd reserved for my family were completely, devastatingly empty. An hour later, while still wearing a gown that cost more than my first car, I found out why they weren't there. They were on a 5-star vacation in Bali, a trip I paid for. And that was the exact moment I stopped trying to earn their love and decided to burn their entire world to the ground instead. Not with fire, but with something far more terrifying to them. A spreadsheet. My name is Clara. I'm 32, and for the last 8 years, I've poured every ounce of my soul, my sleep, and my sanity into building a branding agency from the ground up. I started in my cramped studio apartment with a second-hand laptop and a pot of coffee that was always on. Now, we have a small chic office downtown with exposed brick walls and a client list that I used to dream about. I design logos, build brand identities, and help other people's dreams look as beautiful on the outside as they feel on the inside. I love my work. It's the one part of my life that feels truly, authentically mine. Or at least it used to. The award was the National Design Innovator of the Year. It's a big deal. The kind of thing that turns a small agency into a major player. The kind of thing you call your family about, your voice shaking with excitement. And I did. I called my mom, my dad, and my older sister, Isabel. Their reactions were predictable. My mom, Eleanor, immediately asked what the dress code was and whether the photographer would be from a major magazine. Appearance is everything to her. My dad, Richard, gave me a gruff, "Well, it's about time," as if my success was an overdue payment on an investment he'd made. And my sister, the free-spirited artist who considers my work soulless corporate shilling, just sighed and said, "Oh, another party? Well, I suppose I can clear my schedule. I'll need something to wear, of course." I didn't care. I was floating. I booked them a hotel room near the venue, sent my sister a generous dress fund, and spent a week vibrating with anticipation. 2 days before the ceremony, I got the call. It was my dad. His voice was strained. "Clara, honey, something's come up. A once-in-a-lifetime business opportunity for me in Seattle. I have to fly out tomorrow. Your mother's coming with me for support. It's very high stakes." A pang of disappointment, sharp and familiar. "Oh, okay, Dad. Is everything all right?" He was vague, talking about investors and NDAs. Then the punchline. "We're a little short on liquid cash for the flights and hotel. It's all going to pay off big, trust me. This could be the thing that finally gets us back on our feet. We just need a little bridge loan." I knew what bridge loan meant. It meant a gift. It always did. I sent the money. $4,000. "What about Isabel?" I asked. "Oh, she's not feeling well," Mom chimed in on the other line. "One of her migraines. She's terribly disappointed, but she can't possibly make it." So I pictured them, Dad in a power suit in Seattle, Mom nervously sipping tea beside him, and Isabel in a dark room with a cool cloth on her forehead. I was sad they'd miss my big night, but I understood. Family emergencies happen. Supporting your family is what you do, especially when you're the one who can. The night of the awards was a blur of champagne, flashing lights, and a sea of smiling strangers. I was seated at a table for 5, right at the front. Me and 4 empty chairs. When they called my name, I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated pride. I walked to the stage, my heart hammering against my ribs. The award was heavy and cool in my hands. I gave my speech, thanking my mentors, my team, and my family, who I know are cheering for me from afar. A polite, sympathetic applause rippled through the room. The host even gave me a sad little smile and said, "Well, they must be proud." The lie felt like ash in my mouth. After the ceremony, people kept coming up to me, their eyes flickering to my empty table. "Shame your family couldn't be here. Everything okay at home?" Each question was a tiny paper cut on my soul. I escaped to a quiet corridor behind the ballroom, my smile feeling like a cheap mask. I pulled out my phone, just wanting to see a text. Any text from them. "Congrats!" or "thinking of you." There was nothing. I mindlessly opened Instagram. And there it was, the first photo on my feed. It was from Isabel. A picture of her, my mom and my dad, all grinning, holding cocktails topped with tiny umbrellas. They were tanned, radiant, and disgustingly happy. Behind them, a perfect white sand beach melted into a turquoise ocean. The location tag was brazen, unapologetic, the St. Regis, Bali. The caption read, "Sometimes you just have to unplug and reconnect with what truly matters. So grateful for this surprise family wellness retreat. We needed this." The photo was posted 1 hour ago, right in the middle of my acceptance speech. I stared at the screen, the noise of the party fading into a distant roar. The champagne in my stomach turned to acid. Seattle. A migraine. A high-stakes business deal. It was all a lie. A flimsy, pathetic, insulting lie to get $4,000 out of me for a luxury vacation. They hadn't just missed the most important night of my life. They had actively stolen from me to do it, then plastered their betrayal all over the internet for the world to see. The 4 empty chairs weren't a result of an emergency. They were a choice. They had chosen a beach over me. I wasn't a daughter or a sister. I was a sponsor. I was the R&D department for their lifestyle, the silent investor in their happiness. The award in my hand suddenly felt like a mockery. I walked out of the venue without saying goodbye to anyone, hailed a cab, and on the silent ride home, a cold crystalline rage began to form in my chest. It was the calmest I had felt all night. I knew exactly what I had to do. I didn't cry on the way home. The tears were frozen somewhere deep inside me, replaced by an eerie, methodical clarity. The kind you get right after a car crash, when the world moves in slow motion and you can see every shard of glass hanging in the air. I walked into my loft, the silence a stark contrast to the echoing ballroom. The expensive gown felt like a costume. I unzipped it and let it pool on the floor, like a snakeskin I'd just shed. I made a pot of strong black coffee, sat down at my sleek oak desk, the one I'd bought myself after landing my first major client, and opened my laptop. I didn't open their social media. I didn't type out a furious text. I didn't call them to scream. That would have been playing their game, the game of messy emotions and dramatic confrontations where they always won. No, I did what I do best. I brought order to chaos. I opened a new Excel file. I typed a title into cell A1. The Bank of Clara, a 3-year audit. Then, I started digging. I opened my banking apps, my credit card statements, my Venmo history. My PayPal records. I worked backwards, month by month, year by year. Every line item was a fresh stab of betrayal. It was forensic accounting of my own life. There it was. $800 for Isabel's kiln repair. Another $1,500 for her inspirational artist's retreat to Sedona. There were the monthly payments for my mother's country club membership, which she'd insisted was critical for networking. A cool $550 every single month. There was the $5,000 to cover Dad's minor stock market loss that he swore he'd pay back. He never did. There were the designer handbags for Mom's birthday, the first-class flight upgrades for their anniversary trip to Napa, the constant, "Can you spot me 100?" texts from Isabel. Each transaction was a ghost. A vacation I didn't take, a new sofa I didn't buy, the down payment for a bigger apartment I'd been putting off. I saw the patterns emerge as clear as a brand logo. Isabel's requests always came disguised as artistic necessity. My mom's were framed as maintaining the family's social standing. My dad's were positioned as short-term investments in his inevitable, glorious comeback. They had a whole system, a language of manipulation they'd perfected over years. They never just asked for money. They presented a problem only I could solve. I wasn't giving a handout. I was helping out. I wasn't being used. I was being the responsible one. I worked through the night, the only sounds the clicking of my keyboard and the hum of the city outside. The sun started to rise, casting a pale gray light across my office. My coffee was cold. My eyes burned. But I wasn't tired. I was energized. I was awake in a way I hadn't been in years. When I was finally done, I scrolled to the bottom of the spreadsheet and hit the sum function. The number that appeared on the screen made me gasp. In 3 years, I'd given them over $120,000. $120,478 to be exact. Enough to put a serious down payment on a house. Enough to have taken a year off to travel the world. Enough to have lived. I stared at that number, and it was like looking at a stranger's life. A life I had funded but had no part in. The girl who ate instant noodles at her desk so her family could eat lobster on a beach in Bali. I leaned back in my chair and laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. The rage had cooled into something harder, more permanent. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the utter lack of respect. The profound, staggering selfishness. They didn't see me. They saw a resource. An endless, uncomplaining line of credit. And as the morning sun finally streamed through my window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, I made a vow. The Bank of Clara was officially closed, and they were about to find out what a default looked like. This wasn't a new dynamic, of course. It was just the loudest, most public version of a role I had been playing my entire life. Growing up, Isabel was the artist, the dreamer. I was the fixer. When she would present a clumsy, vibrant, but ultimately terrible painting to my parents, they would coo and hang it on the fridge. "Oh, Isabel, you have such a soul," my mother would say. When I'd bring home a perfect report card, my dad would glance at it and nod. "Good, that's your job. Keep it up." My value was never in my essence. It was in my utility. I remember being 12. Isabel, then 14, decided she needed to go on a school trip to Quebec. The cost was $600. My parents sighed dramatically at the dinner table. "Oh, the timing is just terrible," my mom said, looking at my dad. "With the property taxes due." Isabel's face crumpled. I watched this performance, my stomach twisting. I had just received $200 from my grandmother for my birthday. I'd been saving it for a telescope I desperately wanted. I spent hours looking at it in a catalog, imagining the stars. That night, I quietly went into my parents' room and put the envelope with the $200 on my mother's nightstand. The next morning, she kissed my forehead. "You're such a responsible, mature girl, Clara. Always thinking of the family." Isabel went to Quebec. I never got the telescope. That was the first major deposit I made into the family bank. When I was in college, studying design and working 2 part-time jobs to avoid student loans, my dad's sporting goods store went under. It was his dream, and it collapsed in a heap of bad investments and poor management. He was devastated, but his devastation quickly curdled into a kind of simmering entitlement. It was as if the world owed him for his failure. The night I got my first real paycheck from an internship, he sat me down. "You have a good head for business, Clara," he said, his voice heavy with false sincerity. "Not like me. I'm too much of a people person, not ruthless enough." He then explained that a small final bill from one of his suppliers had unexpectedly shown up. If he didn't pay it, it would ruin his credit for good. It was $2,000, my entire paycheck. "You're just starting out," he said. "You can make it back in no time. For me, this is it." I transferred the money. I lived on ramen and free campus coffee for 2 months. But I had saved my dad. I was the good daughter. Isabel's narrative was even more insidious. She painted her inability to hold down a job as a sign of her artistic integrity. The 9-to-5 world crushes my spirit, Clara. You wouldn't understand. You thrive in it. She framed her financial dependence as a beautiful sacrifice she was making for her art, and I, the practical, grounded one, was expected to facilitate that sacrifice. When she wanted to move into a trendy loft to start her pottery studio, I co-signed the lease. When she couldn't make rent because she was waiting for inspiration to strike, I covered it. I once gently suggested she could get a part-time job at a coffee shop. The look of wounded horror on her face was Oscar-worthy. "And serve coffee to people? Clara, my hands are for clay. They are my instruments. I can't risk them." I paid the rent. My mother was the conductor of this whole symphony of need. She'd call me, her voice a carefully calibrated mix of pride and worry. "Darling, your father is so stressed. He just needs one little win to get his confidence back." Or, "Isabel is on the verge of a creative breakthrough. We can't let something as sordid as a utility bill derail her." She was the master of the guilt trip disguised as a compliment. "We're so lucky to have you, Clara. You're the rock of this family. You've always been the strong one." Strength, I learned, was just another word for being endlessly available. Responsibility was a cage I had built for myself, bar by golden bar. The award, the empty chairs, the Instagram post from Bali. It wasn't a beginning. It was just the end of my denial. I hadn't just been funding their lives. I had been enabling their delusion. And my own. For a full week after the awards night, I went completely dark. I didn't answer my phone. I didn't reply to texts. I let their calls go to voicemail, a growing collection of digital noise I refused to engage with. The first few messages were laced with a fake, cloying sweetness. Mom. Hi, darling. Just landed. So tired. Hope your party was fun. Call me. Fun. She called the biggest night of my career a party. Then a text from Isabel a day later. Hey, we brought you back a little sarong. Let us know when we can drop it off. As if a cheap piece of fabric could patch the gaping hole they'd blown in our relationship. When I didn't respond, the tone began to shift. The sweetness curdled into confusion, then irritation. Dad. Clara, your mother is worried. It's rude not to call back. Rude. That was the word he chose. Not hurtful. Not devastating. Rude. Then came the first financial probe. The canary in the coal mine. A text from Mom. Sweetheart, the country club bill came through. Did you get the notification? It's due Friday. I stared at the text, a bitter smile on my face. Of course, that was the real wellness check. Not, how are you, but, did the automatic payment go through? I ignored it. The silence on my end was clearly making them panic. The calls became more frequent, more demanding. Finally, a week after the Bali post, they did exactly what I knew they would. They escalated. The doorbell to my loft buzzed insistently one evening. I looked at the security camera feed. It was all three of them, standing on my doorstep, their faces arranged in masks of solemn concern. A family intervention. I almost laughed. I buzzed them in, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. This was it. They walked in, looking around my space as if seeing it for the first time. Mom immediately started tidying a stack of magazines. Dad stood with his arms crossed, surveying my office corner. Isabel drifted towards my bookshelf, picking up a design award. Clara, my mother began, sitting on my sofa without being invited. We're worried about you. I just stood there, leaning against the kitchen counter, my arms folded. I didn't say a word. I just waited. You've been distant, Dad said, his voice dripping with paternal disappointment. Ever since we got back. You're not answering our calls. You didn't pay the club dues. That's not like you. Something has changed in you, Clara, Isabel chimed in, putting the award down with a dismissive clink. This award, this success, it's making you cold. It's like you think you're better than us now. I had to physically bite my tongue to keep from screaming. Better than them? I was their ghostwriter, their producer, their bank. They were living a life of my success while accusing me of being corrupted by it. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. We missed the old Clara, my mom said, her eyes welling up with practiced tears. The girl who cared about her family. The girl who understood that love is more important than money. Dad stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder. I flinched. Your mother is right, he said, his voice low and serious. When my business failed, I learned a hard lesson. Money comes and goes, but family is forever. Don't let a little bit of fame make you forget what's really important. That was the moment, the final clarifying, beautiful moment. They hadn't come to apologize. They hadn't come to explain. They had come to recalibrate me, to gaslight me back into my role. They stood there, in the loft built by my sleepless nights, surrounded by the success they'd been bleeding dry. and lectured me on the corrupting influence of money. They weren't just users. They were con artists, and their greatest creation was the myth of our happy, loving family. I looked at their 3 anxious faces, and for the first time, I didn't feel hurt or angry. I felt nothing, just a profound, liberating pity. "Is that all?" I asked, my voice even. They looked at each other, confused by my lack of a breakdown. "I have work to do," I said, walking past them to my desk. "Please close the door on your way out." They left in a stunned silence, the intervention a total failure. They still had no idea what was coming. The day after the failed intervention, I was looking for an old client contract on my cloud drive. We used to have a shared family folder, a relic from years ago for sharing holiday photos and documents. I hadn't opened it in ages. On a whim, I clicked on it, and there, in a subfolder titled Family Planning, I found it. It was an email chain between my mom and dad, dated 5 years ago, right after I'd officially registered my business. I clicked it open, my blood turning to ice as I read. The subject line was Clara's Venture. The first email was from my dad. "Eleanor," it began, "I've looked at Clara's business plan. It's solid. If she plays her cards right, she could be making 6 figures within a few years. We need to be smart about this." My mother's reply came a few hours later. "What do you mean, Richard? It's her business." And then, the email that shattered the last remaining fragment of my illusions. From my dad. "It's our opportunity. Think of it as reparations for the financial and emotional toll my business failure took on this family. She has the earning potential. We have the needs. We just have to manage it properly. Position ourselves as advisors, as a support system. Make sure she feels like she's helping, not just giving. Isabel will need the most support for her art, so we'll need to earmark a portion for her. Clara is practical. She'll understand her duty. We just have to keep her focused on us." I read it 3 times. It wasn't a spontaneous, opportunistic leeching. It was a strategy, a premeditated, long-term plan to divert the profits from my life's work into their own. Reparations. Her duty. Keep her focused on us. They weren't just a dysfunctional family. They were a board of directors, and I was their sole, non-voting asset. The Bali trip wasn't an anomaly. It was an execution of their 5-year plan. My success was never my own. In their eyes, it was a family fund they were entitled to manage. The spreadsheet on my computer screen suddenly felt less like an act of anger and more like a document of liberation. It was evidence. That afternoon, I did 3 things. First, I called my lawyer and had him draft a formal letter, severing my signature from Isabel's apartment lease, effective immediately. Second, I called the country club, canceled my mother's membership, and paid the final bill. Third, I sat down and composed one last email. I addressed it to all 3 of them. The subject line was simple. Final invoice. The body of the email was brief. "Dear family," it read, "for your records, I have attached a summary of my financial contributions to the family over the past 3 years. I consider this my final investment. The Bank of Clara is now permanently closed, and all lines of credit have been revoked. Please direct all future financial inquiries elsewhere." Then I attached 2 files, The first was the spreadsheet. The Bank of Clara, 3-year audit, XLS. The second was a PDF of their email chain from 5 years ago. I hovered my mouse over the send button for a long time. This wasn't just ending an arrangement. This was detonating a bomb in the middle of their lives. A life I had, in large part, built for them. I thought about the girl who gave up her telescope. I thought about the empty chairs at the awards ceremony. I thought about the word reparations. And I clicked send. A moment later, I blocked their numbers, their emails, and all of their social media profiles. The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. The fallout was, for a while, indirect. It came to me in whispers and worried calls from extended family. My Aunt Carol called, her voice dripping with concern. "Clara, your mother is beside herself. She said you sent some very cruel email?" I just said, "Did she show you the attachments?" The line went quiet. "Well, no, but then I don't think we have anything to talk about, Aunt Carol." I stayed polite, detached, and impenetrable. About a month after the invoice, Isabel was served an eviction notice. She called me from a blocked number, hysterical. "Clara, they're kicking me out. My studio, my work. How could you do this to me?" "I didn't do anything, Isabel," I said calmly. "I just stopped paying your rent. That's between you and your landlord now." "But my art, my spirit," she wailed. "Maybe your spirit can learn to pay its own bills," I said, and hung up. Last I heard, she moved back in with my parents, and her pottery wheel is gathering dust in their garage. My mother's social life imploded. The loss of the country club was a death sentence to her status. Her friends, who were really just fellow members, slowly faded away without the shared golf course and tennis courts. She had to get a job for the first time in 15 years, as a receptionist at a dental office. My aunt told me she complains constantly about the fluorescent lighting and the lack of stimulating conversation. My dad was the most pathetic of all. Without my funds to prop up his fantasy of being a dormant business tycoon, he had to face reality. He's now a driver for a ride-sharing service. Sometimes I see his car around town. It's the same model I helped him buy 2 years ago. The irony is so thick, you could choke on it. They eventually had to sell the house, the one I grew up in, the one filled with so many ghosts of my compliance. They live in a small, cramped apartment across town now, all 3 of them under one roof, stewing in the consequences of their own design. As for me, the first few months were strange. I felt a phantom limb of responsibility, a twitch in my fingers to check my phone for the next manufactured crisis. But slowly, a new feeling started to seep in. Peace. A deep, quiet, uncomplicated peace. My money was my own. My time was my own. My life was my own. I took the $120,000 from the spreadsheet, not as a loss, but as the price of my freedom. And I started to live. I hired 2 new designers for my agency, expanding our capacity. I redecorated my loft, not with practical, sensible furniture, but with beautiful things I loved. A deep green velvet sofa, a hand-woven rug from Morocco, a ridiculously expensive painting from a local artist. I started taking weekends off. Real weekends, where I did nothing but read novels, walk through the park, and meet up with friends. Real friends. The kind who celebrate your success without expecting a piece of it. For my 33rd birthday, I booked a solo trip. I went to Italy for 2 weeks. I ate pasta, drank wine, and wandered through ancient streets without a schedule or a single person to answer to. One evening, sitting at a small cafe in Florence, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, I felt a tear slide down my cheek. It wasn't a sad tear. It was a tear of pure, overwhelming gratitude. Not for my family, not for my success, but for myself. For the woman who finally chose herself. For the girl who finally got her telescope and realized she could see the whole universe with it. I don't have the family I thought I did, but I have myself, and I'm finally learning that she is more than enough. Thank you for listening to my story. What do you think? Was I too harsh? Or was it the only way to break free? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've ever had to make a tough choice to protect your own peace, please share. You never know who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about finding your way.